question to the VAC manager. And she also said, I don't know. I don't know where the heck that came from. But he was asking for a completely separate service and supports for neurological injuries. And she said, oh, just by the way, if up the road you have suicidal thoughts, and this is what he told me she said, it's better than blowing your brains out against the wall. That is what he told me she said. Very sensitive of her.
Okay.
Okay. Earlier in your testimony, you said that you were worried that your benefits or that VAC would have you pay because of your coming here to testify. And I'd like to ask you what makes you say that.
Human nature. People can be vindictive. And here I am contradicting. I listened to the live testimony on Wednesday, and there were 3 points that I believe to be untrue. One, I do not believe that the call was not recorded. I do not believe that, and neither does the veteran as part of the transcripts. I believe that is untrue. And it was also avoided that MAID was pushed as opposed to, oh, by the way, this is something that may be offered. It was pushed because he said the words in the transcript, why did you ask this of me? Why are you talking about this? Well, just in case, up the road. She was pushing it like a bad used car salesman. It was pushed. And he asked about the legality of it. How is this legal? He asked the VAC manager. How is this legal? This can't be legal. You can't push this on people. And that is not reflective of the testimony that I heard on Wednesday. And that makes me angry. Because integrity is doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. And I know that I'm threatening 2 people's jobs today by saying this. I'm aware of that, and that is why I fear for my benefits. Because 2 people, I do believe, were not speaking the truth on Wednesday, and they could lose their job over it. That's why I'm nervous.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
Say welcome to MP Ken McDonald to our committee in replacement of Wilson Miao. And now I invite Miss Rachel Blaney for 6 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses today, and of course, a special thanks to the veterans who've served us so well. And I'm sad to hear that the return service is not as good, and a special recognition to you, Mr. Meincke. My grandfather was also a Princess Patricia, so it's very good to be in this space with you today. One of the things that I also want to say is it sounds like, Mr. Meincke, you have a relationship with the veteran who experienced this, and I just want to thank you so much for assisting that veteran, and I want to also ask you to pass on my thanks to them for being so brave to bring this forward. It's not easy, as you said and outlined very clearly before, to speak up. And so I just want to say thank you through you for making sure that this incident didn't go invisible and make it seen. So I just want to pass that on.
The credit to that goes to the veteran. He went to Mercedes Stephenson personally, and I can say that the Global News report was done very, very well.
Yeah.
I was actually quite surprised. I didn't expect it to be accurate, but it was.
Thank you. And I think part of the testimony that we heard very clearly, both in the last one and this one, is the importance of having these conversations recorded so that things can be reviewed in a meaningful way. So based on the testimony that we heard last week from the department, it was clear to me that if a veteran calls in to get support through the call center, all of those are recorded. However, if the worker calls from their office directly to the veteran, those calls are not recorded. there seem to be, from the department's perspective, some concerns about privacy, which really don't make sense to me, because a call coming in is less private than a call going out. I'm not sure that I understand that analysis. So I think what I will do today is ask all of the people who've testified if they have any thoughts about the importance of maintaining recording so that we can test for these kind of incidents, so that there is some way for accountability, and if there's any concerns of privacy for the veteran in making sure that these are recorded. And I'm just going to go in the way that we started. So first, if I can go to Colonel Conrad.
Yes, thank you. I'll be brief so we can run the table this time. I'm astonished that these conversations are not recorded. You cannot pick up a telephone and return a call to Veterans Affairs. You cannot call your caseworker or try to get back to the same desk. It's so precise and clinical. I am shocked that these recordings don't occur. And not just for the protection of the veteran, but of the caseworker. Like it would just make terrific sense that occurs. So I'm quite surprised by that.
Quickly,
Also,
excuse me, Mr. Conrad, could you please turn on your camera, please, so we'll be able to see you. Sorry to interrupt. I stopped.
Whoops. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead. Thank you.
And the last point I was going to make was the MyVac account, as has been indicated, is an excellent written summation of most, at least the front end of most conversations with Veterans Affairs. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Meincke.
I don't believe the call was not recorded. I don't think it's even possible. And even if that was true, somehow there would be notes. There's always notes. There's a summation of the conversation, because you have to. I don't know a single veteran in the system who hasn't gone through a caseworker every 6 months. So there has to be records. There has to be notes. This has to be documented, because when they burn out and the new caseworker comes in, they'd be starting from zero with no notes. That doesn't make any sense. Of course there's notes. My bank records all my calls. I mean, of course it's recorded. I do not believe the testimony. I believe it was false on Wednesday.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hughes.
Hello. I can't speak onto what's recorded by VAC or what isn't, but I'm very concerned that it should always be the veteran's choice if they're talking about, their families or other personal information. It should be the veteran's choice. That's really the only comment I have, because as others have said, there is always records through notes, through my VAC account, through client notes in the computer system. There's always notes, a track of something. So in some cases, I believe it should be the veteran's choice whether they want to speak about personal issues or not. But it is also there to protect the VAC employee. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Thorne.
Yes, absolutely. I'd echo Ms. Hughes' thoughts. I really believe that this must be given through informed consent by the veteran as to whether or not they would like to have a call recorded. I can understand the desire to record calls for quality assurance or for addressing issues like this. But from the perspective of a service provider, veterans are often seeking our services because they are seeking confidentiality and privacy. They may be worried about the perception of seeking services, about the impact on their career. And so I think first and foremost, we have to lead with informed consent on the part of the veteran, because that will make the services the most accessible that they can be.
Thank you.
Right on the time. So now let's go for a second round of questions. And I'd like to invite MP Thierry Dordel for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses here as well, and especially those that have served. Thank you for your service. When I left the meeting here last week, I didn't feel very good about it, quite frankly. I was upset, and over the weekend on Friday, I would have to say, I guess ahead of time, The veteran that we are talking about reached out to my office, and I've had lengthy discussions like yourself, Mr. Meincke, and there are transcripts, there are messages that we've went over since the weekend, and I just want to make sure that before we begin that this individual that we're talking about is nonpartisan. He has no link to any party, first of all, and the other thing I want to say, quite frankly, is his concern, like you've said so well, is about other veterans that perhaps had the same experience and how that could affect them. So I just, before we even begin, I want to say that. But I was quite disappointed with the minister. I was quite disappointed with the deputy minister for the fact that if that was my brother, my sister, my father, anybody, a friend, I think for what happened, and I've seen the documentation, I can't share it as well at this particular moment in time. I haven't even shared it with my colleagues, quite frankly, to honor this gentleman. But I have to say, the apology, as far as I'm concerned, I would think that an individual at the top should have called this individual. Obviously, they suffered from post-traumatic stress, and to leave them hanging after that fact is unacceptable. This came out in August, so I would just, my question, I guess, to you, do you think that the apology and how that went forward was meaningful?
I didn't hear the apology. It was a week later, and which he did comment on. He's like, it's been a week. It's kind of an emergency. It's like, well, I got you when I could.
Yeah, and the message was they didn't know who the individual was, but they sent a letter so they know who the individual was. So
yeah,
you would think, in my mind, I don't care who you are, I think a phone call, how are you doing, how are things going, would be what someone should do in the leadership role.
Given the gravity of what it did, I mean, I got phone calls from around the world over this. People ask me, is this true? People that know me and trust me. Is this true? Did this actually happen? Yeah, it's true. It actually happened.
And the individual also wanted to stress that, like you said earlier, you had great comments about they don't see if you have post-traumatic stress, so they've given their life to our country, and then people kind of shun them. And I think this speaks to a bigger issue, and this is what he said. How many other people have we done this for? Are we are we keeping numbers? I guess, from Oliver Thorne to you, are there numbers of individuals? You said, are they going down? We track it in, for our CAF. I'd like to see that. I don't know if this committee sees that, because we have to move forward, and I don't think we are, quite frankly.
I'm tremendously happy that he reached out to you. I gave him your number, and I didn't know if he would or not. He's gone dark on me. I haven't had correspondence in over a week.
Well, and the issues, too, I think are far greater that he is one. So how many issues? And I think it's outside of the MAID question, and this is what I want to sort of say. This speaks volumes to the way that they are perceived as individuals after giving their career. So coming from National Defense before, we could not get people to join. My question is to the two individuals that have served us. Would you recommend to your children or your nephews or friends to actually join the Canadian Armed Forces?
First, there's 3 that served. That's
okay.
Here in the witnesses.
Would you suggest?
And the answer is yes, but with eyes open. Matter of fact, my oldest boy, he's all excited because next week I'm taking him at the age of 16 to join the reserves, where at least he has an easy out. But my boy's eyes are fully open, and he doesn't have tons of childhood trauma, so I think he'll fare well. But it has to be eyes open, because although there is a system in place to help, it's a son of a gun to access it. The benefits are there, but actually receiving them, whole other thing.
Okay, what about the other 2 individuals?
So my answer would be the exact same. Absolutely, yes. This is a great country, and this entire planet needs more of the Canadian soldier, Canadian serviceman. And I believe that fundamentally, and I've seen it in the different places I've served, from Kandahar to Cambodia. But it would be with eyes wide open. Very well said by my colleague. Thank you.
15 seconds. I really can't get too much out there. I just want to say I think we all need to do a lot more to make sure that that's not the view that these veterans have, because it bothered me all weekend, quite frankly.
And now I'd like to invite MP Sean Casey for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Meincke, I want to get into the to your testimony a little further. It is absolutely jarring. I want to make sure that I understand it. The recordings that you have were recordings that were made by the veteran of the calls subsequent to the call in which he was, in an unprompted fashion, directed towards Maid. So that conversation, you have no recording of it, but you have conversations of apologies from officials afterwards. Is that it?
Correct.
Okay. Now, these recordings that you do have, are you aware of whether the other person or people on the call, other than the veteran, whether they were made aware that the call was being recorded?
I do not know.
Okay. So do you know whether Veterans Affairs is aware of the existence of these recordings?
Of these ones, I do not know.
Okay.
It depends, but he would have told them, and it would be in the notes.
And
So the answer to that question almost certainly will be in the notes.
okay. And you've listened to the recordings?
I have.
Okay. And was there any reference in the recorded conversations to something that happened in the unrecorded conversation with respect to a veteran that had availed himself of medical assistance in dying as a result of advice from the department? So
Yes,
was that referenced in the conversation?
Yes, that was the core of his concern, because somehow, and I don't know the exact verbiage, but somehow in the original conversation where he was offered Maid, somehow in that conversation, she says, "We've done it before. That's why I know I can do it for you, and we did it before, and we are now supporting the surviving wife and 2 children." That's what he told me that conversation contained.
But my question is, in the recording that you listened to, was that part of the conversation?
He said that. Yes, he said that in that recording. Yes.
Okay.
Because that's what he was asking the VAC manager about, and of course she said, confidentiality, I can't discuss it. She didn't deny it. She didn't say, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. She said, I can't talk about that. But she did acknowledge that that happened.
Okay. And was there also an acknowledgement in the recording of the apology that she had pressed this upon him and persisted after he said no twice?
Yes, he was clear about that.
So that was in the recording, so it was raised in a recorded conversation, and did she acknowledge in that conversation that that in fact occurred?
In my mind, she did. Yep.
And
she said it was inappropriate and it shouldn't have happened.
And in the recorded conversation, was there reference to it's better than blowing your brains out against a wall?
No, that was in a private conversation that he had with me when he extrapolated more on the interaction.
Okay. So in your evidence, you indicated that you are convinced that there is, in fact, a recording of that first conversation.
I would be shocked if that didn't exist, yes.
Okay, but other than your gut, other than your experience, do you have any other basis for that firm belief?
Every phone call I've ever had with Veterans Affairs, where it says this call will be recorded.
Okay. So including calls with a veteran service agent?
Yes, especially those.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Conrad, you had raised the issue of sensitivity and cultural training and indicated that perhaps Veterans Affairs is too stretched to be able to do that and to do it effectively. What advice would you have for them?
I think sorry, just waiting for that echo to leave. The first thing I would advise is a focus on professional education and professional development of the caseworkers themselves. And I know budgets are tight, but we do not spend enough on this government department. We are when you talk about a disposable income that a government of Canada has and where things get invested, we are not a large interest group when it comes to garnering votes. The department should put some money, preferably an increased amount of funding, into training its own.
Yeah.
And that cultural piece is absolutely vital.
Thank
because you. Don't know what
Thank you, Mr. Conrad. I'm sorry, time is up. Et là, nous allons passer.
We will now have 2 short 2.5-minute interventions. I would like to ask Mr. Luc Desilets. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would be for Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, we know that suicide is 1.9 times higher than the general population, and for veterans less than 25, we know that it's 2.5 times superior to the general population, and so which is at 1.4 for normal. So a suicide every 9 days. My question may seem ridiculous, but did you agree with me that simply by using the words MAID, that medical assistance in dying, it's really totally unacceptable and not right for any veteran that's suffering from PTSD?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree. Again, it feels silly to have to say that, but yes, if asked the question, I absolutely agree. And I question the ethics of it, even the legality of it. I am not in any way well-versed in MAID as a topic, but in preparation for today's testimony, I did some basic research, and my understanding is that the only person who is qualified to discuss MAID is a primary care provider, meaning either a physician, a nurse, or a psychiatrist. And so it seems to me that a case manager would not fit that definition. And so I don't understand how or why this would be discussed by a case manager with a veteran. And even more troubling is from Mr. Meincke's testimony, the idea that the case manager said, and now we are looking after the surviving spouse and child, which almost seems to incentivize the idea of medically assisted suicide, which is just completely unthinkable.
If you had an employee who had used those terms, those expressions, those suggestions for MAID, and that the wife and children would get support, would they still be an employee of yours if they were to say that?
Absolutely not. They're certainly not qualified to speak about that. They know that. And once again, it runs counter the entire purpose of our organization, which is to prevent suicide. But without question, if somebody were to engage in that kind of a conversation, that would be complete grounds for dismissal.
Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Your 2.5 minutes are up, and now I would like to invite Madame Rachel Blaney. You have 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I think I just want to come back to just a short summary. So right now, when a call is made into VAC through the call center, it's recorded. What we heard from the department is when that is a call out, it doesn't get recorded. If it's a direct call to a service agent, it's not recorded. So I appreciate what we heard is either that it should be recorded or there should be some sort of accountability given to the veteran whether or not the conversation is recorded. But I think we hear clearly from the department that neither is done. So I just want to thank everybody for clarifying that point. So the point that I would like to come back to, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Meincke, is just around the idea of sanctuary trauma. Of course, we know that veterans who are reaching out, and I appreciate the multiple levels of testimony today that talk about how hard it is to take that step. I think it is for anyone, but for a person who has served who has committed to be a protector, it is even harder to take that step. So I'm just wondering about the impact of going somewhere where you're hopeful that you will get help and then having somebody not there for you in the way that you need it, and what that means in terms of sanctuary trauma, and what workers need to know about that so that we don't see anything like this ever happening again.
How much time do I have?
1 minute.
Last year, after years of struggling horribly with suicidal thoughts that I didn't want in my head, I'd call them intrusive thoughts, trying to beat them away, and I felt like I was getting closer and closer to the cliff. I talked to my therapist, provided by VAC, and her solution is, well, the knife that you would use, just hide that. And if you haven't done it yet, you probably won't. That would be an example of sanctuary trauma. 2 months after that happened, I attempted suicide in July of 2022. And I saw it coming. I said, I see it coming. I need some help. I have never been back to that clinic. When I called that clinic, and I said, can I talk to a manager or something and tell them about this experience? Because this shouldn't happen to people. There was no exit interview. There was no concern, and there was no follow-up. So I was on my own. Thank God I have the resources because of my show. But that's sanctuary trauma. And the breach of trust that creates, I will never go back to that clinic. And that was after years of being there.
Thank you, Mr. Meincke. And now, let's go to Mrs. Katie Rogenthal for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you all for being here and for being as brave as you are today in sharing this truth from your hearts. Mr. Meincke, I just want to mention, I was horrified when MAID was first brought in. The first place my mind and my heart went was to our veterans and the potential danger involved in this. It amazes me to hear you all say today that you would serve again and you encourage those you love to serve, in spite of being in theaters where you and your comrades face death and peril, and where you participate in and witness incredible violence. Many have faced abuse from those that they thought would be their mentors and have their backs. You're facing challenges with your relationships, all of these things trying to fit into a civilian world, and yet you would still encourage them. But the one point I'm hearing is this whole issue that breaks the camel's back is sanctuary trauma. And in a quick 5-minute speech I got to do on Take Note debate on mental wellness, I spoke to this and said sanctuary trauma is what happens to the spirit and the mind of a veteran when they experience the failure of their government to fulfill its promise to take care of them and their families. Would you agree with that picture? Am I painting it right?
Sounds like a good way to paint it to me.
Okay. I would just like to ask you and Oliver as well, sorry, Mr. Thorne. Ms. Hughes spoke about the strict protocols that exist around MAID. And my companion who spoke last week when I wasn't able to hear, he said, was this referred to law enforcement? It is punishable up to 14 years behind bars for someone who is doing something they should not do in regard to this. And yet I'm seeing strict protocols truly being stripped away more and more by the government on this issue. And do you feel that in this case this is proof, again, that, I'm sorry, this is out of control?
There are no strict protocols. I had Nicole Scheidel on my show. I'm shocked that she's not one of the witnesses here. She's the executive director of Physicians for Life or something like that. On September 24th of this year, a 21-year-old man was completed MAID. His issue, he had one eye and he had depression.
Right.
He's dead. He died on the 24th through MAID.
Okay.
Because he has one eye and depression. That sounds like, I thought mental health issues weren't going to be part of the conversation until March next year.
Right.
But he's dead.
Okay.
So it doesn't seem like there's a big barrier to entry to me.
Thank you. Mr. Thorne, with the wonderful work that you do as well, we know that the number of assisted suicides in Canada has risen to 10,000 this year. In your work, do you hear concern, and are you aware of these circumstances actually taking place within our veterans community? And how is it impacting your work?
Until this testimony today and the news story that came out in August, I think that medical assistance in dying was not on my radar as a significant issue for the veterans that we are serving. I think this has been a serious wake-up call. Suicide has been on our mind for the 10 years that we've been operating and for the 25 years almost that our program has been around. Again, it is the worst possible outcome, and we exist, our entire reason for existing is to try and stop that outcome. So suicide has always been on our minds. But the possibility of suicide through medical assistance in dying for a mental health disorder, again, that we know to be treatable, we know that people can improve, is worrying. Absolutely. I'm not qualified to speak about MAID holistically,
Okay.
but certainly with our focus and the work that we do with veterans, we know that they can get better. And we've heard from many veterans who don't believe that they can get better. And then they do. They make progress. The quality of life improves. And my fear is that we are offering a vehicle for people to end their lives when there are treatment options available, but those treatment options are more difficult to access than medically assisted death.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. 20 seconds. I have one question for Ms. Hughes. For your service managers working with the MyVac account, from what I understand, there is no tracking within VAC or the Legion of who is seeing what when, as far as going back and being able to determine who was reviewing a particular veteran's account. Do you have a system in place to be able to do that?
We, through Veterans Affairs, they can contact me at any time with a list of people and why did we contact them. And for whatever reason, we can also see client notes. So if one of the service officers did call Veterans Affairs, then we would see the notes in there.
Thank
There
you.
would be no recording that we would see, though.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite for 5 minutes Mrs. Richie Valdez. Please go ahead.
I want to thank the witnesses for joining us, particularly Mr. Meincke. I appreciate your bravery and all that you've gone through. You continue to support. Thank you. Apologies. Trauma is not easy for those of us who have gone through it. So I just want to commend you for your bravery today. Excuse me. Colonel Conrad, I appreciate also your contributions, and I'm sending you my condolences for your loss. So Colonel Conrad, in your opening, you recommended cultural awareness training to make the VAC team aware of the sensitive nature, and I think you even quoted wound to mind. Continuing Mr. Casey's questions, can you elaborate on any additional advice for training for VAC?
Yeah, I think I spoke about money and budgets earlier, and I almost regret doing so. It becomes so cliche. What I would encourage of VAC is to be more interested in the leadership function of your own department. Be more interested in your own people and in developing them and supporting them. And I am sorry if the words sound harsh, but I've often felt when I'm talking with someone on the phone, trying to get help and trying to navigate this long process, like the delay, it is a function, but it is not the fault of the front line. I've always felt that there's a real absence of executive leadership in this department. And that might be unfair because I'm in Alberta. I'm not tweeting about this every day. I'm trying to pick up a first down, right? And keep my life moving forward. I think, thank you for your question. I think that, and would encourage at the senior executive level of the department, be more interested in leading your people. And it's such an earthy ministry and such a focused one. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
You also mentioned professional services and investing money. What would that do, in your opinion, if the right money was invested in that?
Well, I've often felt when I'm talking to VAC that I'm trying to represent myself, trying to represent soldiers. You really are talking about a foreign country in terms of the constituency you represent. And I feel that there is courseware, there are educational opportunities that would communicate what this regiment of Canadians, some of our best heart's blood, what they are really like. And you can sense that this incident we're talking about today is really reprehensible and concerning, but you can sense in the wider community that I've dealt with at VAC on the phone an essential goodness and a willingness to help. But there's such a gap between the world that these men and women know, like soldiers, sailors, airmen and women, and what a caseworker knows. And if we could just bridge that, and when you get to know us, it's easier to support and easier to imagine how hard it is to have that jacket and tie on for some of our servicemen and women who serve in other roles, or just trying to make it through the day without a drink or without harming themselves. So.
Thank you. And I'll just connect this with Mr. Thorne. So the services that you provide with the Veterans Transition Network, you noted that the network supports trauma through reliving it. Can you describe how that helps with the healing process for veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the sort of recognized standards for treating trauma, there are a number, but one is prolonged exposure therapy. We take our program is what you might call talk therapy. So we have a group of veterans who are together with specially trained psychologists and returning program graduates, what we call paraprofessionals. So these are veterans who've been through the program themselves, and they return to act as the bridge between the veterans and the psychologists running the program. And to Mr. Conrad's point, that helps us be culturally informed and competent in working with veterans. Our approach to trauma is, in a very titrated and controlled way, revisiting challenging moments in people's military service, or indeed at any point in their life, that have affected their day-to-day functioning. So we're able to revisit.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Time is up. And now we have enough time for a last round of questions. So I'm going to start with MP Fraser-Tolmie for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to recognize the service of those that are participating today. I'm going to say that I've been sitting here for quite a while and just absorbing this, and I've came in with some questions, and I'm just throwing them out, and I'm going to use questions that I feel that I should be asking after hearing some of the testimonies. And I would ask the question of this room is, what is the mandate of Veteran Affairs? What is our mandate? Because every organization that we've had speak to us, the mandate of Legion and Veterans Affairs, Mr. Thorne, your organization, is to help those in need. to make them feel valued, to make them feel supported. And we're having a conversation right now that completely throws that out the window. I would ask myself, what would happen if a young student went in to talk to a student counselor in school and said, I'm having a hard time, I'm having issues, and they were given the same answer as what the person that we're talking about was given. We've got a way to end your life. So I'm really struggling right now with where we're going right now in society and what the message that's coming out of Veteran Affairs is. Mr. Meincke, based on your knowledge, was a physician ever included in the conversation with the individual who went through with MAID?
A physician?
Physician.
No.
Okay. You run a podcast, and I would ask, what is the mission of your podcast?
Well, I actually have one. The mission is to save lives and relieve pain by making help for PTS injuries easily accessible, with a vision of a world where the path to recovery is clear. That should be the same mission and vision that VAC has, but if it is, they're missing it.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that this person, this gentleman, that you have the transcripts of that reached out to you was looking for help?
He was looking for help for a common service-related injury.
Okay. And do you feel that the service that he was given was the right service or the wrong service?
He was given no service. He did his own research to find help, and he was asking for support, and was asking if VAC had any other that they could suggest. And now that I have the opportunity, he asked for supports for his family because of the phone call, and he was denied.
Okay. So would you say that a boundary was crossed? Would you say that the mandate that Veterans Affairs has or should have was crossed?
Unless the mandate is budget cuts through getting rid of us, yes, a line was crossed.
Okay. I just want to say on a quick note, you mentioned PPCLI. My cousin served in Croatia on PP in your unit, and I know that afterwards you and I can take a moment to maybe discuss that. We might know some common people.
Potentially.
Colonel Conrad, I know you opened up your comments earlier on that you said maybe some well-intended comments had gone astray. Would you stick to that after hearing some of the comments that have been shared and understanding what should be a mandate for Veterans Affairs?
No, absolutely not. My eyes have been really opened with what other folks have brought forward this morning. I don't stand by those comments, knowing now what I know. I'll tell you one thing about MAID. I lost my dad on May 25th to a medically assisted death after a long fight with cancer. And the very first person that opens their mouth to ask for it or mention it is the patient. And under no duress to a medical practitioner, unless I'm misunderstanding the legislation, my dad had to bring it up, not even the practitioner. So I just wanted to be clear there.
Somebody asked me why people commit suicide. Hey, somebody asked me that.
Okay. Well, let me invite Mr. Luc Desilets for 2 minutes and a half, please. Mr. Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Thorne, I'd like you to explain how, in your type of organization, how do you deal adequately with the suicide ideation that some veterans had, and made, what type of information, what type of training do you give to your employees to deal with these two issues?
Apologies. On the topic of suicidality, our staff undergo first aid mental health training in order to be able to respond to suicide or suicidal ideation. Specifically on our programs, all of our facilitators are registered mental health professionals, so either psychologists or registered clinical counselors. And the peer supporters, the paraprofessionals that I mentioned earlier, the veterans who work alongside our psychologists, they undergo specialized training with our organization as well. In terms of how we address suicide, we address it largely through the reduction of symptoms and distress that would give somebody suicidal ideation. So our program is designed to address post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, but also isolation. We see very often that for those who are struggling with suicidal ideation, they are perhaps suffering with depression or post-traumatic stress, but what we see very often is also moral injury. So either witnessing or engaging in the line of service, something that runs core to who they believe they are and their values as a person. This injury is particularly nefarious because it produces an enormous amount of shame in the individual who suffers from this. And shame leads to isolation. Isolation leads to a lack of peer support, and all of this leads down the line towards suicide. Our intervention is designed to bring people together in a group, to get them comfortable with one another, to teach them skills for understanding why these experiences are affecting them the way they do. And if we create a safe environment, these individuals can share some of these difficult moments in these stories with one another. They can reduce that shame, reduce the isolation, learn skills to cope, and they go out into the world after the program with a peer support network of those individuals that they took the program with. That is our approach to reducing suicidality. In terms of how our coordinators or how our staff would respond to medical assistance in dying, they have been instructed not to discuss it with anybody who brings it up, and that if they are asked, they must refer the person to their physician or to a primary health provider.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. And sorry, Ms. Blaney, I forgot to invite Mr. Charles Rogers for 5 minutes, and after that I will go back to you. So, Mr. Rogers, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I, too, would like to welcome our guest today. And I guess thank you for your service as well. That's incredibly important. We have heard a lot of testimony, and, there's lots of questions that we could go in different directions. But, Mr. Thorne, first of all, you mentioned in your testimony that you talk about PTSD and suicides and what happens, suicide prevention, of course. And you mentioned the fact that vets are reluctant to reach out for help. So it left me wondering, is there a process in place for veterans when they finish the military service and they go off to live a civilian life? Is there some kind of process where vets are monitored, or is there some form of follow-up by VAC with these people who finish their service as members of the military? Are you aware of any of that?
I think that is in the process of being built out and has been over the course of the past few years. So specifically, this would be the transition group within Department of National Defense. Previously, it was known as the JPSU, the Joint Personnel Support Unit. Those have all been rebranded or relaunched, if you will, as the transition centers across Canada. The idea being that preparation for transition will become a standardized part of military training. throughout a military individual's career. But as they approach their release from the military, that training within the transition group will ramp up with the hope of better preparing them for the transition from military to civilian life. This work has been ongoing for a number of years. We are hopeful that will help the transition process, because what we often see is folks who slip through the cracks. And again, because of that reluctance to reach out, they sit there and they continue to deteriorate, their symptoms deteriorate until they reach a point of crisis. And that's what we hope to avoid.
Thank you for that, Mr. Thorne, and it's good to hear that that kind of transition group is being, that process is being implemented. Mr. Meincke, you mentioned that you were a long time before you reached out. So from your perspective, I guess the same question is, was there any follow-up with you before you reached out? Was there any follow-up from Veterans Affairs Canada?
No, I'm an old-timer. I got out in 1995. So when I got out in 1995, it was don't let the screen door hit you in the butt on the way out. There was nothing at the time, and there was nothing subsequently before 2017 when I first entered the VAC system. So during that entire period, 23 years, there was never an outreach call of any sort, no.
Should there be?
Oh, yes. Yeah, the longer, it's like a cancer. The longer you leave it, the harder it is to treat.
Yes, yeah. So, Mr. Conrad, or Colonel Conrad, I should say, what steps should VAC take to address the recent incident from your perspective and ensure this kind of thing never happens again?
Well, I'm not sure. From what I've heard today and what I know about Veterans Affairs, I'm not sure that they're harnessed to adequately deal with it. The apologies I've seen in the press, and I agree with the earlier comment that at the very least, if this was my department, I would be making at the very least a phone call. This is a horrific breach of trust because of the suicide is what we all work against in terms of you can recover from PTSD. You can be whole again. So this is a fundamentally concerning. I'm not sure they can get there from here on their own. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's my honest belief. It's too late. From what I understood, the apology in the press was 4 or 5 days in the making. During that time, deputies and ministers would be scrambling to make sure that they had their best face forward, that they had all the facts. And if that's all you're doing, well, I'm sorry, that dog won't hunt. I'm not sure that Veterans Affairs on their own can rectify this.
So, oh, sorry, out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Much, and now I'd like to invite Ms. Rachel Blaney for 2.5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And I would like to take this opportunity to come back to Colonel Conrad. A couple of things. I'll ask you one question. If we have time left, I'll ask you another one about the civilian provider. But I just want to go back to the conversation that I had earlier with Mr. Meincke about sanctuary trauma. I really appreciate some of the things that you've shared today, and I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the impact of sanctuary trauma. You've indicated earlier that there needs to be more fulsome training, which I hear is something that you're speaking up very clearly. You also talked about the fact that there might need to be help from outside of VAC. So if you could just talk about sanctuary trauma and what kind of supports you think would be imperative to make sure that things like this don't happen again. And we obviously hear it's a lot more broad than just this incident. You're on mute. Thank you.
Okay, you didn't miss anything good. I'll try and be brief, and thank you for your question. My experience with getting help, I wandered in the woods for about 4 years of my life where I did not work. PTSD, it grafts so seamlessly with your own sense of self. It's like the devil touching you on the sleeve. It's almost impossible to see in yourself, and you want to. In my case, I wanted to deny it. I didn't want to admit that I was wounded. I wanted to go on, but when I had a friend not dissimilar from Mr. Meincke, who was really instrumental in bringing me in from no man's land. And when I started to reach out, the process was deny. No, we won't accept your claim. We need more of this. And I was at the point where my mind was what it was. My back was out. I had had a major heart attack and was on disability from this job here, and trouble feeding your family, right? And to hear the approach on the phone of, well, you're going to have to do this, or we need more of that. And I was at the point where I was selling my metals on eBay to try and make mortgage payments on my farm. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of who we are. Like, I want to be good again, right? Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I know I can't walk straight. I know that fundamental misunderstanding with the person on the phone. Like, I'm not a quitter. I'm even having trouble putting it into words for you today. So to answer your question, for me, attitude and understanding are so important quality in an institution, in a thinking institution. The name of this ministry is Veterans Affairs Canada. How can you not know us so well? Like, how can you not be absolute expert on Canadian veterans when that is your single point of focus and taking care of the men and women who have served this country? So I do come back to education. I think it starts at the top. I have long said that the top end of this department, they don't seem to get that they're not an insurance company. They don't seem to get that they're in the business of taking care of human beings who would have given their last breath to protect you, and many of them have.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, that's okay, Mr. Conrad.
Thank you.
So you were on the. Okay, thank you so much, and time is up. And now I'd like to ask Mr. Blake Richards to speak for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. So here's what we know. We've got a veteran who came to Veterans Affairs seeking help for injuries and trauma that he is dealing with as a result of his service to our country. And instead of being offered support or resources to help deal with the issues that he was facing, it was suggested that he maybe consider medical assistance in dying. And it was pushed on him. Despite his insistence, he wasn't interested. It's caused him to spiral downwards from what we've heard from you, Mr. Meincke. And we, despite what we were originally told, which was that this was an isolated incident, it turns out there's at least one other veteran that this has occurred with, and that veteran is no longer with us. Now his family is being supported. Leaves one to wonder how many others there might be, and how many other deaths might have resulted as a result of this. We were told that the identity of this veteran wasn't known to the officials. Yet now we've heard from you, Mr. Meincke, that a letter was actually sent to the individual. So clearly his identity was known and is known to the Veterans Affairs officials. There's a lot of contradictions here, including the one that you shared about recordings. I agree with you. I find it hard to believe that there wouldn't have been a recording of that phone call. I mean, I think just about everything we do with an organization like Veterans Affairs or other large organizations is recorded, and we all know that. You mentioned yourself when every phone call with them, you always get the indication that the phone call will be recorded. So it is hard to imagine this phone call hasn't been recorded. And given all the other contradictions that we've seen, I find it hard to believe that doesn't exist. So I do have some questions I'd like to ask, but there's a motion I'd like to move, and I'm going to move that. And I'm firmly of the belief that this should be one that we will all support quickly and easily, and we can pass it and move on and carry on with hearing more from our witness testimony today. But given all these contradictions, I really think we need to hear again from the minister and from the deputy minister and the assistant deputy minister who were here with us last Thursday. We've got to clear up the contradictions here. So I'm going to move that motion that we ask the minister, the deputy minister Paul Ledwell, and the assistant deputy minister Stephen Harris back to the committee to hear on this issue for 2 hours, and that happened within the next month, but before November 24th. So I'll move that motion, Mr. Chair.
D'accord. Donc, motion.
Okay, so we have received a motion, and according to the rules, there will be a discussion or debate at the next meeting so that we can adopt the motion. Normally, motions need a notice, I believe, of 48 hours. No. Just a moment, please.
Merci
Mr. Chair,
pour.
it's my understanding we don't need notice because of the subject matter of the meeting, and I'm quite confident, given what we've heard today, and I mean, I'm sure everyone is shocked by this situation, and everyone that didn't recognize the contradictions. I mean, obviously, I know you have to open it up for debate, but I'm hopeful that we won't need debate and that we can all just pass this. Maybe we can even have consensus to do so, and then we can carry on with witness testimony. That's my hope. I'll put that to the committee before you open up for debate.
Non, je vous réponds.
Okay.
Your motion is on the subject that we are discussing right now. We don't have to wait 24, 48 hours. So the motion is on the table. So now, if there is any discussion, so I stopped the time for the witnesses. So I'd like to know if there is any discussions. Anyone? Monsieur Desilets?
Mr. Desilets? Yes, I just want to say in terms of procedure, we talked about 2 or 3 meetings on this our subject, present subject. Does that mean that for the next meeting and the third meeting that we will have the ministers and the deputy ministers if they're available?
Parler.
The motion speaks about in the course of the next month. So if you want to bring an amendment, you can do so.
I mean, I'm just trying to leave. I think the minister should appear. This needs to be cleared up, and I would hope that they would want to appear as quickly as possible. I was only simply allowing for scheduling. I know that can be an issue, but I would strongly suggest that meeting happen as quickly as it can, and then following that, we can probably as a committee determine what our next steps would need to be, if any. But I do think it's important that there's a lot of contradictions here that they need to be cleared up as soon as possible. And I would think that the minister and his officials would want to clear those up as quickly as they can as well. So I would say, although I'm leaving that latitude for them, I think that it should strongly be suggested when we write to the minister that not to try and leave a month, to try to come as quickly as they can. But we're obviously need to give some flexibility for scheduling.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and the clerk will work on that situation si toutefois la motion est adoptée.
If the motion is adopted. Madame Morgenthau.
I think there's some confusion around what Mr. Desilets was saying, because we had said 2 or 3 meetings. This is our second. Did we have a third one scheduled? No. At this point in time?
I don't think so, because
so is
next...
this a third meeting, or is this a 4th meeting that we're asking on top of the 2 or 3?
Yeah.
I think is that what you were trying to determine?
So I can add something to that, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that we had, as a committee, the decision had been made to have 3 meetings.
Right.
We've only had 2, so there obviously needs to be another one. I don't know, and I don't know if there's other witnesses we still could hear from on this. And we also don't know, what might come from the meeting that we have with the minister. So, in my mind, I think we should be prepared as a committee to make that decision following that meeting, whether there needs to be more meetings and how many of them there should be.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to tell the committee, yes, we agreed for 3 meetings, and for the 3rd meeting, we have no witnesses. So that's why for Thursday, we were supposed to work on the report marriage after 60. So we are discussing, and the motion is on the table.
Thank you, Chair. We have no opposition to that. We feel that the committee could ask the department, realizing that he may have some commitments, but that it's important that we get a chance to speak with the department again. We're okay on that front for sure.
Excuse me? Yes, go ahead. I'm
asking for the vote to be conducted.
For the vote? Okay. Ok, d'accord. Ouais. So, Mr. Richards, first of all, I'm going to ask everyone if there is no opposition for that. So we have the motion on the table. Est-ce que, excusez-moi, Monsieur.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sean Casey.
The only thing that I would like to raise, I see the case for bringing back the minister and the senior officials, given the contradictory evidence today. I think we should probably bear in mind what was said at the last meeting, that the investigation is underway but not complete. I think it would be reasonable for us to expect the senior officials and arguably the minister to come back when it is complete. So I just throw that out there. If we wait for them to finish their work and then have them come in to discuss it, including the testimony that came to light here today, would that not make more sense to get a more complete picture? That would be my only concern. I have no concerns in principle on bringing them back. The only question I have is around timing.
Thank you, and I'd like to invite Mr. Fraser-Tolmie.
Well, I see that as 2 different issues. I see that we've got contradictory information in the last time that he was here. So that's an issue that we would like to deal with right away. And then if there is something that comes back from the continuing investigation, then I see that as a different issue. So
yeah.
I appreciate the comments from Mr. Casey, but I think they're 2 different issues. And
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, I essentially had the same thought. Obviously, if there's a need or a desire for the minister to come back once the investigation is completed, that would be welcomed, and I think that probably should occur. But I don't think we should be waiting for that when we're talking about the kinds of contradictions we've heard today. I think the minister I would hope would want the opportunity to clarify those as soon as possible, and we're wanting to offer him that opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, and I agree with this motion. I think we've heard things today that make us all concerned, and it's important for us to be accountable to the veterans who've served us so well and make sure that we help with that accountability. And I also know that the committee requested very clearly in the last committee that when this work is done at the department, that they would send us a report as soon as it was completed. And so once that report is completed and sent to the committee, I think we can take the next step of what we want to do. But I don't think we need to wait until then for the minister and the department to come. So hopefully we can allow the chair to hopefully see unanimous consent, and we can hopefully have the minister and department in quickly. And then if we have to call them back again, because of the report that we received, then that is something that we can respectfully do. And at the end of the day, this shows all of us coming together to work hard for veterans. And I think that's where our focus has to remain.
Okay, thank you so much. And my understanding is the motion is to invite the minister and the deputy minister as soon as possible. So I'd like to know if there is opposition to adopt that motion.
So just to clarify, the motion would be yes, to invite them as soon as possible, but in any case, no later than November 24th, so within the next month, but as soon as possible, but no later than.
Perfect. So, we agree on that. Okay. Donc, la motion est donc adoptée.
So the motion has been carried. And we will come back to our witnesses. We have Mr. Richards. You have 2 minutes left. You have the floor.
We will have the minister and his officials reappearing at this committee. I'll maybe ask our witnesses, and we can start with you, Mr. Meincke, because you're here with us in the room, and then carry from there. What questions should we be asking them when they return? What would you recommend this committee to us that we should be asking? What sort of questions need to be asked of the minister when he returns?
Definitely like to see a policy and procedure manual that clearly puts in writing what calls are recorded and what calls are not. There's no way that something structural like that is not on paper somewhere and official. So I would like that so that there's no misconceptions, and that would be essential in order to have any kind of confidence from the veteran community.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Mr. Conrad, do you have thoughts? Mr. Thorne or Ms. Hughes?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Just to add on what Mr. Meincke has said, this is absolute foundational harm, right to the center of gravity of what your department is all about. I would want to hear, yes, the things that Mr. Meincke mentioned, but I think I would want to hear a plan in the immediate, like in the emergent, tactical, immediate, and in the medium to long term, so this does not reoccur. Given how quintessential this is, I don't feel it's been addressed. That would be my question to them.
Thank you. Mr. Thorne, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo the comments from Mr. Conrad and Mr. Meincke. And I would add, I think, a clear understanding from the department of how this will be avoided completely in future. And I know as well that there was a report that was published by an expert panel on MAID and mental illness. And I'm looking at the report in front of me on the Canada.ca website. It was published on May 13th of this year, and it featured a number of recommendations that it feels the government should adopt with regards to medical assistance in dying for mental health. And so I'd like to know that the Department of Veterans Affairs has reviewed this report and that they are working to incorporate those recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Thorne, Mr. Richards. So now it's 1 o'clock and 2 minutes, and we have to stop at 1 o'clock. So I'd like that Mr. Casey has an intervention, a quick one.
Yes. I'd like to be able to ask one question and before we adjourn, please.
Yeah, well, we were supposed to go to you, but let's give 30 seconds for that, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Meincke, would you please ask the veteran for his permission to allow you to provide the recordings to this committee?
I have. And if he cannot be guaranteed anonymity, it's not even a maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
Ici. So now, laissez-moi prendre le temps au nom des membres.
Now, on behalf of the members of the committee and on my behalf, I would like to thank all of the witnesses who came to speak with us today. And Mr. retired John Conrad, Mr. Mark Meincke, Corporal, retired and host, Operation Tango Remember Trauma Recovery podcast for military, veterans, first responders, and their families. Carolyn Hughes, Acting Director of Veterans Services, National Headquarters, the Royal Canadian Legion, and Mr. Oliver Thorne, Executive Director, Veteran Transition Network. I would like to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Meincke and Mr. Conrad, your testimony was very moving, and we do hope your health may be much improved in the future. So thank you very much for coming here before the committee. And I would like to remind the members of the committee that this Thursday we will be in camera to study the report on benefits, survival benefits for survivors, and also we will look to the motion that was adopted today and look at the conclusions. So would the committee be ready to adjourn? Well, thank you very much. I would